I'm worried that the GOP is losing the fiscal high ground here. The attacks on big spending and inflation are not going to work because of the support for these bills. I'm especially worried about this $250 billion semiconductor monstrosity. But it's not only that, as you know. Anyway, what do you think about this? Are you as concerned as I am?
Yeah, Larry, I am concerned about it, and there's two issues here. One is the spending, the other one is the brand, the Republican brand that you're talking about. And this is really bad timing for this semiconductor bill, if you will. Listen, the goal is noble. There is no question that supply chain issues, whether it's food, whether it's minerals, whether it's semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, we are vulnerable to China, way too vulnerable, and we ought to be doing more to be competitive or just put them out of business altogether, because that's what their job is. That's what they're committed to. But trying to out-China China is not the way to do that. The way to do it is reopen our free market system. Eliminate the regulations and the taxes that get in the way of the innovators. And we can attract our own businesses back here. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that you talked about during the Trump era did exactly that. We had many of our corporations repatriate overseas dollars back into the United States when the incentives were turned to benefit the United States as opposed to other countries. So there are ways to do it, but we don't have to spend taxpayer dollars necessarily to do it. Now, I'm all for EPSCoR funding. I like basic research. I do think that the federal government has a role in some of this in the early stages where there might not be dollars spent. But we're well beyond that, particularly with the $52 billion plus the $24 billion in tax credits specifically for corporate citizens who aren't even under the law obligated to build or to manufacture these semiconductors in the United States.
That's a key point. We had Senator Tom Cotton on the other day. There are no guardrails, as far as I can tell, incidentally for China, but also like Intel, which is, foaming at the mouth to get this $50 billion from Uncle Sam. Intel's got plans to build a plant in Germany. I think they've already started to build a plant in Germany. I got nothing against the Germans. I just don't think I have to have taxpayers give money to Intel for that. So your point, so let's go back to your point. Your point is exactly right. I always thought the Republican way, which was the free market capitalist way, was to reduce tax and regulatory burdens, and therefore make America the most hospitable investment home in the world. We win the global race for capital. Companies come here. That's the Republican way. Whereas the Democratic way is to spend and regulate and tax, so that government is driving the economy rather than private investment or entrepreneurs. But I think there's some confusion among some of our friends.
Well, to be fair, the semiconductor industry is viewed by many, and not completely inappropriately, Larry, as a national security issue. Okay, I understand that. But again, our advantage is our openness. And when we become the subsidizer, trying to out-subsidize our competitors around the world, we give up some of that advantage for sure. And let's be hospitable to business. Every now and then we're going to have to take on China. But I think, again, President Trump taught us the way. Lower taxes, lower regulations, create the appropriate natural incentives to invest in the United States, and when necessary, put tariffs on things coming in from China, as opposed to subsidizing our own companies who, again, in this bill, the guardrails that you and Tom Cotton talked about, that's exactly right. There are very loose definitions here. And again, if we didn't learn anything from the Trump years, it's that we need to be more prescriptive at the legislative level and not turn over the details to the bureaucracy, because they will only add to the burden. They will not make it better.
Yeah, that's very important, sir. Look, I know semiconductors are important. I had dinner the other night with Wilbur Ross and our wives, and we talked about that. But you know what? Pharmaceuticals are important.
Yes,
Steel is important.
Yes.
Energy is important. You follow? In other words, lower taxes for all businesses, or an R&D credit that could be expensed immediately for all businesses, or 100% immediate write-offs to depreciate for all businesses, or deregulate for all. You see what I'm saying? I hate to see us go back to picking winners and losers. I mean, this goofy bill, as you probably know, they've got more Solyndra cash cow hedge funds. All right, we're going to go through this whole thing that they did with Obama. The Energy Department gets its boondoggles, the Commerce Department, the Transportation Department. I mean, this is crazy. This is like all that, what is it? Scratching all the Democratic itches. This is just political handouts. That's all this is.
Well, there's a lot of corporate welfare in it. There's no question about it. Again, with noble goals, but there's no end to the good things government can do if we had all the money in the world, but we don't. Instead, we have inflation, we have a recession looming, and now we have this idea that Democrats have to tax not big corporations, but rather pass-through businesses, Larry.
Wow.
I mean, it's hard to come up with a dumber formula than what they've come up with.
No, you're quite right. That small business tax would be an absolute killer. Senator, just before we leave you the last minute or so, there's this good headlines now, the Chinese Communist Party land grab in the U.S. And we went through some of this. I was in a breathtaking national security presentation once that showed how Huawei had their little connectors, you know, on the posts, on the telephone poles right near our military bases where they could spy, basically, and that had to be stopped. And it looks like the Chinese are back. Governor DeSantis took a rip at them, I think correctly, with Florida. You've had some purchases going on in North Dakota, as I read. I mean, this Chinese land grab, I think they're not interested in investment. They're certainly not going to help the U.S. I think it's just a spy mission. That's all it is.
Well, the spying's a big part of it. As you know, they don't go anywhere, but that they don't use some passive spying to collect data on people, you know, steal intellectual property, force technology transfer, obviously, if you're doing business with them. But in addition to that, Larry, if you just set that aside for a minute, the land grab itself, you just talked about all the supply chain vulnerabilities. Well, food is one of them. And we learned during the pandemic that China's ownership of much of the meat packing in the United States made us vulnerable to price increases. It hurt our ranchers, but it helped the packers. And then now they want to buy up other farmland, and when they get a supply chain, they'll make some money with it for sure, and they'll use that money for nefarious things, including hypersonic missiles and building out a navy. But in addition to that, again, they capture more of our food supply chain, which we ought to be protecting with everything we have. I'm glad to sell a lot of food to China and to anybody else that wants to buy it. We grow more than we need. Exporting is a part of the free market. But what we ought not do is let them come in and buy it all up, and then they control who gets it in a crisis.
You know, they don't let us, U.S. investors, just buy up their land willy-nilly. They don't.
No, I bet you and Wilbur Ross should have dinner again and talk about buying up some land there in China next to a military base. See how it goes.
Yeah, see how that works, right? See, we're going to get Wilbur on the show to talk a little bit about it. He's more sympathetic. Look, I'm just saying, I'm not saying that semiconductors aren't important, but
of course,
Senator, I'm just saying that all these industries are important. And so on a level playing field, you know, lower their tax rates, improve their depreciation write-offs, get them back to repatriate so we have onshoring, deregulate, stop this insane climate act. You know, for everybody, like everybody, not winners and losers. That used to be the Republican way. That was called, pardon the phrase, free market capitalism.
It still is, Larry. It really still is. There are a few outliers every now and then, but it's still where we are.
All right. I'll take your word for it. Senator Kevin Cramer, the best of the best, as always.